If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
9 hikers set out on a trek through the frozen wilderness of the Ural Mountains. Experienced, prepared, and determined, they had no reason to believe they wouldn't return. But something happened on that mountainside. Something so bizarre that when their bodies were discovered weeks later, investigators were left with more questions than answers. Their tent had been slashed open from the inside. Some of them fled barefoot into subzero temperatures. Others suffered massive internal injuries with no external wounds. One was missing her tongue. Soviet officials ruled it an accident. Because of course they did. The public wasn't so sure. Was it an avalanche, a secret military experiment, something the government covered up? Or was it something even stranger, something that left no survivors, only a mystery that refuses to die? In January 1959, 10 hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out on a grueling expedition through the remote, snow-covered wilderness of the Soviet Union. Their goal was to reach the Ural Mountain, a treacherous route, but one that could be navigated, classified as a Category 3, the most difficult level of Soviet hiking certification. These were not amateurs. Led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, the group consisted of experienced mountaineers, each trained to survive in extreme conditions. This was supposed to be a test of endurance, not a brush with death. The journey started out as planned. The hikers meticulously documented their progress in journals and photographs, recording the frozen beauty of the landscape and the camaraderie of the group. But early in the trip, one member, Yuri, fell ill and was forced to turn back, a twist of fate that would save his life. The 9 remaining pressed on, unaware that they had less than a week to live. On February 1st, the group set up a camp on the slopes of a mountain that I can't pronounce in Russian, but it translates to Dead Mountain in the local language there. The decision to camp in this exposed location was puzzling, but Dyatlov, a disciplined leader, may have chosen the site to prepare the group for the harsher conditions ahead. They pitched their tent, cooked a final meal, and settled in for the night. They never made it any farther. This was where their journey ended, and where the mystery began. When the hikers failed to return as scheduled, their families grew anxious. At first, officials dismissed concerns, assuming delays were normal for such an intense expedition. But as days passed with no word, a search party was sent to find them. What they discovered on February 26, nearly a month after the hikers had last been seen, defied logic. The search team first spotted the group's tent still standing but in complete disarray. It had been slashed open from the inside as if they had cut their way out in a hurry. Their belongings, boots, coats, supplies were still inside, untouched. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication of an animal attack. It was as if something had sent them into a blind panic, forcing them to flee half-dressed into the brutal cold. Following a trail of footprints, searchers found the first 2 bodies near the tree line. Both were dressed only in underwear, barefoot in the snow, with their hands raw and stripped of skin, likely from a desperate attempt to climb a nearby cedar tree. It was clear they had frozen to death, but the question remained, why were they out there in the first place? As they continued the search, more bodies were found, scattered across the landscape. 3 more were discovered between the tent and the tree line, positioned as if they had been trying to crawl back. Their deaths were ruled hypothermia, but their positioning suggested they had been running from something before collapsing in the snow. It wasn't until 2 months later that the last 4 hikers were found, buried several feet under the snow in a ravine. Their injuries told a much more disturbing story. One had a crushed skull. 2 others had massive chest fractures, injuries so severe that forensic experts compared them to the force of a car crash. Yet their bodies had no external wounds, as if whatever had struck them did so with incredible pressure, but without breaking the skin. One of the hikers was missing her tongue and parts of her face, a detail that would fuel speculation for decades. The official cause of death for most of the hikers was listed as hypothermia, but the circumstances of their discovery, the violent injuries, the lack of any clear explanation, none of it made sense. And if the cold was all that had killed them, why had some of them fled into the night without shoes, while others had managed to grab clothing from their fallen companions? It was as if they had fled in terror only to meet something far worse in the darkness. For more than 6 decades, theories about what happened at Dyatlov Pass have ranged from the scientific to the supernatural, and none explain everything. The official Soviet report at the time concluded that the hikers died due to a compelling natural force. Vague, but technically not incorrect. The real debate is about what that force actually was. One of the most widely accepted explanations is an avalanche. If a slab of snow collapsed their tent, the hikers may have panicked, cutting their way out and fleeing down the slope in fear of being buried. But this theory has problems. No evidence of an avalanche was found at the site, and the slope of the mountain doesn't quite fit the conditions for one. Plus, if they had been buried by snow, why was their tent still partially standing? Another theory suggests that extreme winds caused an infrasound phenomenon, low-frequency vibrations that can cause intense feelings of unease, confusion, and even panic. The idea is that these sound waves triggered an overwhelming sense of dread, causing the hikers to flee irrationally into the night. But infrasound wouldn't explain the massive chest fractures or missing tongue. Then there are the more sinister possibilities. Some believe the hikers unknowingly wandered into Soviet military testing zones and were caught in an explosion or exposed to some unknown weapon. Traces of radiation were found on some of their clothing, and then there were reports of strange orange lights in the sky at the same time of their deaths. Could they have been silenced to cover up a classified experiment? Others believe the group was attacked by something not entirely human. Some claim the injuries suggest an attack by a yeti or an unidentified predator. The strange injuries and missing body parts have also led to theories involving UFOs or some kind of extraterrestrial encounter. The Mansi people, the indigenous group native to the area, have long spoken of spirits and unseen forces in the mountains. Did the hikers see something they weren't supposed to see? Then there's the simplest but maybe the most unsettling possibility: internal conflict. In a state of extreme cold, exhaustion, and fear, did something push the group to turn on each other? Could panic, hypothermia, or even hallucinations have caused a deadly fight? Some evidence suggests that clothing was taken from fallen members, implying the survivors may have desperately tried to stay alive longer. But even if that were true, it still doesn't explain the powerful, almost surgical nature of the injuries. Every theory solves one piece of the puzzle, but leaves others unanswered. And decades later, no one has been able to explain exactly what happened that night on Dead Mountain. The Soviet authorities wasted no time in closing the case. After a brief investigation, officials ruled that the hikers had died due to a compelling natural force, a phrase vague enough to mean just about anything. The files were sealed, and the area around the pass were quietly restricted for several years. For many, this only deepened the suspicion that the government knew more than they were willing to admit. In the decades that followed, the case remained one of Russia's most baffling unsolved mysteries. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the investigation, promising to finally put an end to the speculation. A year later, they concluded that a snow slab avalanche was the most likely cause, a theory that suggests a heavy sheet of snow collapsed onto the tent, forcing the hikers to flee. But this explanation leaves gaps still. Why were the injuries so severe yet so inconsistent? Why was there no clear evidence of an avalanche at the site? And what about the radiation found on some of their clothing? Despite modern attempts to reframe the incident as a tragic accident, The Dyatlov Pass mystery refuses to go away. There's something about the sheer strangeness of the case, the panic, the unexplained injuries, the lack of definitive answers that keeps it alive in public imagination. The hikers left behind no witnesses, no survivors, and no clear explanation, only an eerie puzzle frozen in time. What happened that night on Dead Mountain? Was it an unfortunate act of nature, a Cold War cover-up, or something beyond human understanding? More than 60 years later, the Ural Mountains remain silent, offering no answers, only the lingering echo of a mystery that refuses to be buried. Thanks for listening to this episode of 10-Minute Mystery. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps other curious minds find the show. And if you're craving more stories but with a darker twist, check out my other podcast, 10-Minute Murder. Still brief and still bingeable. See you next time.